Can we stay just one night? The little girl stood in the middle of the ranch yard with dust covering her face and tears running down her cheeks. She was barely 8 years old, wearing a faded brown dress several sizes too large, her tangled hair hanging around her frightened face. Beside her sat a tiny wooden cradle, containing a sleeping baby wrapped in an old cream-colored blanket. The girl clasped her hands beneath her chin and looked up at the rancher kneeling in front of her. His name was Elias Mercer, a broad-shouldered 40-year-old rancher with a weathered face, dark hat, worn leather vest, and the quiet strength of a man who had spent his life fighting the land rather than people. "Just one night," she whispered. "You'll be gone before sunrise." Elias looked at the baby, then back at the child. "Where are your parents?" The girl's lips trembled. "We don't have anywhere to go." Something in those words made Elias glance toward the empty road behind her. There were no horses, no wagon, no adult footsteps, just a little girl and a baby who had somehow crossed miles of wilderness alone. Elias slowly stood. "What's your name?" "Nora." "And the baby?" "Sammy." She hesitated before adding, "He's my brother." Elias looked at the tiny cradle again. "Come inside," but Nora immediately shook her head. "We'll cook for it." Elias frowned. "You're 8, I can sweep." She pointed toward the barn. "I can feed chickens, I can carry water, I don't need much." Elias stared at her trembling hands. She wasn't asking for pity, she was terrified of being turned away. Before we continue, if stories about courage, kindness, and unexpected second chances touch your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Meaningful Impact 2.1. Now, let's see what happened when one rancher opened his door to 2 children who had nowhere else to go. Elias carried the cradle into the farmhouse himself. Nora followed cautiously, never taking her eyes off him. He gave her warm soup and fresh bread, but she barely ate. Instead, she kept checking Sammy. When the baby began crying, Nora immediately rushed to the cradle and rocked it with both hands. Elias watched silently. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked. 2 days. "Where did you sleep?" Nora lowered her eyes. "Under a tree." Elias's expression hardened. "Who brought you there?" "My mother." He waited. Nora finally whispered, "Bima told us to keep walking toward the ranches. She said if we found a man named Elias Mercer, he would understand." Elias froze. "How did your mother know my name?" Nora reached into her dress and pulled out a small wooden button. "She said you gave this to her years ago." Elias recognized it immediately. It had come from his old ranch coat. He remembered a young woman named Rose, who had worked at a neighboring ranch nearly a decade earlier. They had known each other briefly before she disappeared west. "Where is your mother now?" Elias asked. Nora's eyes filled again. "She couldn't come." "Why?" "She was sick." Elias crouched beside her. "Is she alive?" Nora nodded slowly. "She told me not to cry. She said I had to get Sammy somewhere safe." That night, Elias gave Nora the small guest room. Sammy slept the fireplace in his cradle. Nora refused the bed at first. She said she needed to stay near her brother. Elias placed a chair beside the cradle. "Then sleep there." She nodded. Just before dawn, Elias heard horses approaching. He stepped outside and saw 4 riders coming toward the ranch. Their leader was a tall man named Wade Granger. "We're looking for 2 children, Wade said. Elias leaned against the porch post. "There aren't any children here." Wade smiled. "Don't lie to me, Mercer." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps you should keep riding." Wade's smile disappeared. "The girl stole something." Elias looked toward the farmhouse. "She's 8 years old. She knows where it is." Elias stepped off the porch. "Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here." Inside the farmhouse, Nora had heard everything. She opened her mother's old cloth bag and found a small silver whistle. Its surface were initials, RM. Beneath it was a folded note. Nora read it with difficulty. "If they come, don't give them the whistle. Your brother's safety depends on it." She suddenly understood why the men were there. The whistle wasn't valuable because of silver. It contained a tiny hidden compartment holding a key. But Nora didn't know what the key opened. Outside, Wade kicked the porch step. "Last chance, Mercer." Elias didn't move. "Leave." Wade signaled his men. The first man rushed forward. Elias met him halfway. The fight exploded across the ranch yard. Elias blocked a punch, shoved the attacker against the fence, and turned just as another man charged from the side. A horse broke loose, sending dust everywhere. Elias managed to force both men backward, but Wade pulled his weapon. Then Nora stepped outside. "Stop!" Everyone froze. She held the silver whistle in her tiny hand. Wade smiled. Elias looked at her, and Nora whispered, "My mother said this is why they want us." Elias stared at the silver whistle in Nora's hand. "Get inside," he ordered quietly. Nora didn't move. Wade's men began closing in again. Elias stepped between them and the child. Nora, take Sammy and go to the cellar, but they want this. I know, then they'll hurt you. Elias looked over his shoulder. That's my problem. Nora hesitated, then grabbed the cradle handle and pulled it toward the farmhouse. Wade suddenly lunged. Elias intercepted him before he could reach her. The two men crashed against the porch railing. Wade fought with the desperation of someone who believed he had everything to lose. Elias fought because he had finally found something worth protecting. Their struggle moved across the yard, through the dust and beside the horse trough. Wade struck Elias hard enough to knock his hat into the dirt, but Elias recovered and forced him backward. Meanwhile, one of Wade's men tried to enter the farmhouse. Nora saw him through the window and quickly locked the door. She lifted Sammy's cradle and dragged it toward the cellar. The baby began crying. "Shh, Sammy," she whispered. "I'm here." Inside the cellar, Nora opened the silver whistle. With trembling fingers, she discovered the tiny key hidden inside. She remembered her mother's words, "If you reach Elias Mercer, he'll know what to do." Nora looked around the cellar. On the far wall was an old wooden cabinet. She tried the key. It opened. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with blue thread. The first letter was addressed to Elias. She read slowly. It explained that Rose had once discovered a scheme involving Wade Granger. He had been stealing wages from immigrant workers and forcing families from their small plots by threatening them with false claims. Rose had gathered evidence and hidden it because she feared for her life. But the letters revealed something Elias never expected. Rose had not sent Nora to him because he was simply an old friend. She had sent her because Elias owned the only piece of land in the county that Wade could not legally control. The letters contained proof that Wade had been trying to force Elias off his ranch for years. Outside, Elias finally overpowered Wade and knocked the weapon from his hand. But two more riders arrived. Elias looked toward the farmhouse and realized he was outnumbered. He grabbed a lantern and smashed it against the ground. Not to start a fire, but to create a sudden wall of smoke and confusion. The horses panicked. The riders lost control. Elias rushed toward the barn, released the ranch horses and sent them thundering through the yard. The men scattered to avoid being trampled. Wade shouted in fury. Elias used the moment to pull the farmhouse door open. "Nora." She appeared with Sammy. "We have to go." "Where?" Elias looked toward the northern hills. "Somewhere they won't expect." But Nora shook her head. "No." Elias stared at her. "My mother said we had to come here." He looked at the letters. Nora continued. "She didn't send us here to hide." She held up the papers. "She sent us here because she knew you could stop him." Elias finally understood. Rose hadn't been asking him to protect two children. She had been asking him to expose the man who had terrorized an entire valley. By sunrise, Elias rode into town with Nora, Sammy, and the letters. Several families were waiting outside the courthouse. They had suffered under Wade for years, but none had possessed enough evidence to challenge him. Nora's mother's letters changed everything. One by one, people came forward. They brought their own documents, receipts, and testimony. Wade's influence collapsed before he could silence them. But when Elias returned to the ranch that evening, Nora was standing beside the same little cradle where their story had begun. She looked worried. "You said we could stay one night," Elias said. Nora lowered her head. "I know. You still planning to leave at sunrise?" She looked toward the farmhouse. "You don't know where we'd go." Elias walked over and knelt beside her, just as he had the first time they met. Then he did something nobody in the valley expected. He handed Nora a small brass key. "What is this?" she asked. "The key to the little house behind the orchard." Nora stared at him. "It has 2 bedrooms," Elias said. "One for you, one for Sammy when he's older." Her eyes filled with tears. "You mean, we can stay?" Elias smiled. "I wasn't asking you to stay one night." Nora looked confused. "I was asking you to stay until you stopped being afraid." She began crying. Elias continued, "And if that takes the rest of your life, then this ranch has room." For the first time since she had arrived, Nora dropped her shoulders and let herself cry without hiding it. Sammy slept peacefully in his cradle. The sunset covered the ranch in golden light. The same little girl who had arrived asking for one night now had a home she never expected to find. Years later, Nora would still keep the old silver whistle in a wooden box. She would tell Sammy that their entire future had changed, because one rancher refused to shut his door. And whenever someone asked Elias why he had taken responsibility for 2 children who weren't his, he always gave the same answer. Because sometimes a person doesn't choose the family they are born into. He would look toward the little house beyond the orchard, but they can choose the family they refuse to abandon. The ranch grew busier. Nora learned to ride, read, and manage the garden. Sammy grew into a cheerful young boy who followed Elias everywhere, and the little cradle that had once carried a frightened baby became a reminder of the night two lost children found a place where they belonged. Nora had arrived with one request. "Can we stay just one night?" Elias had given her something far greater, a home, a future, and the certainty that no matter how dark the road became, she would never have to walk it alone again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Meaningful Impact 2.1 for more emotional Wild West stories, powerful twists, unforgettable characters, and cinematic endings. Sometimes the most unexpected decision isn't the one that changes a moment. It is the one that changes an entire life.